Thanks, everyone. Amazing that so many could join us on behalf of Teamgage and Julia. It's just really exciting to be having this conversation today about teams and effectiveness. It's on a lot of our minds, clearly, and we're all at this very unique juncture in terms of future of work. We're thinking about dynamic teams, technology, flexibility, hybrid working, all of these things. And it comes back to how can we be helping teams to work better together? And there's that, always think of that Steve Jobs quote about great things in business are never done by one person or a few people, they're done by teams. And that's just so important in 2021, and I think for all of us. And really hoping that there's something that all of you can kind of get out of today's session. And I'm confident there will be, whether you manage one team or multiple teams or just belong to a team. It's all really, really relevant at the moment. So I think we said earlier, we've got the Q&A going, so please put any questions as we go down in there. And the chat is also running as well. So we'll be having a look at comments and really want to start a conversation, especially towards the end of this, around some of the key topics and themes that you're raising and you're bringing up. So at Teamgage, we're obsessed with team dynamics and how we can support team effectiveness from a technology standpoint, but how we use technology and having the right expertise is critical, and we know that. And that brings us to our speaker today, Julia Steel. So for those of you who don't know Julia yet, she has over 20 years of incredible experience bringing teams together and delivering change and transformation. I love that quote you put in there, Julia, the powerhouse of implementation. I think
yes.
Very, very relevant, because it's not just about vision, it's actually about getting stuff done. And that's equally important. And also, I don't know how you've had the time to write 2 books as well in all of those 20 years as well, which is pretty incredible. So I'd recommend everyone go and have a look at those. But I'll hand over to Julia at this point. Really keen again for everyone, put your comments in the chat, put some questions in there. We'll have a look as we go and try and have some conversations around those toward the end. So over to you, Julia.
Thanks so much, Richard, and welcome again, everyone. Thank you for embracing my music taste this Wednesday afternoon as we dive into how to get teams working together. As Richard said, I've had a long career being part of teams and leading teams, and I firmly believe that the whole reason we're leaders is because our teams exist. And one of my favorite quotes actually comes from this book, if you can see it, Extreme Ownership, How US Navy SEALs Lead and Win. In there they say there's no such thing as bad teams, only bad leaders. So wherever you're joining from, I really want you to embrace this conversation as we go through the next half an hour. Now, the good news is I only have 2 slides, which if your last year has been anything like mine, I'm absolutely over PowerPoint, so I only have 2 things for you. But what you are going to need is a pen. It doesn't have to be an Apple pen. It could be a pen or a pencil or an old school crayon if you're feeling creative. And you also need a piece of paper just for a little bit later. So this is going to be interactive. But I really want to lean into the conversation about how we get our teams working better together, because I know certainly from my own teams, the last year has been really hard on them. But one thing I know for sure is if we want to shape the future, if we want to shape our organizations, we need our teams to be showing up and being engaged every single day. So the more I talk about teams, the more passionate I get about them. And I know personally over my career, I've been part of some great ones and I've been part of some terrible ones. And I go back to 1965 when Bruce Tuckman talked about and coined the phrase forming, storming, norming and performing. And I've certainly spent a lot of time in my team in teams where forming and storming seems to be the general gist of how things run. Whereas actually what our organizations want us to be is in that performing stage. And performing can mean lots of different things to each of our organizations. I'm aware that we come from a really broad range of industries. So when we're talking about performance, to me, that could be anything from being more innovative, more productive, more profitable, more engaged, happier customers, better social presence, more sustainable. There's lots of ways that we need to perform today. And so I keep all of those different lenses in mind. But the last year has been really, really hard in lots and lots of ways. And I'm sure in some ways you're all a little bit overhearing about it. But what I'm finding is when I talk to my clients and when I coach leaders and their teams, is that everyone is somewhere on a journey. There's some teams that are trying to look at the future and they've just got nothing left in the tank to get there. So the conversations I'm having with them are things like, we know we've got to keep going, we know we've got to keep changing, we know we've got to, keep refining and pivoting and shaping, but we just don't have anything left in the tank. And that's a hard place to be, not just from an engagement point of view, but everything that sits around engagement in terms of our mental health and well-being, how motivated we are, how we show up for work, and how we continue to take action as organisations. Here in Melbourne, where I am, certainly I'm having a lot of conversations with organisations about things that they could do after being in lockdown for so long last year, where we really couldn't do anything. It's actually been quite nice to start to have conversations about what could we do for this year, now that we can hopefully, fingers crossed, start to see and work with each other in something that starts to feel a bit more normal. Not everyone is in that place, and I know some people, parts of Australia in particular, have been through we could and are already working pretty well and are back in the offices, and other parts of the world, you guys will get there as well, I'm sure. I'm really starting to see some teams, though, really branching into what are we actually going to do and what will we do? And particularly at the moment where we start to feel like the door's been open for us to start to do things, but we're not sure whether someone's going to close the door before we get there. There's this little bit of uncertainty around what we will do. And but that's where the machine and the rubber really starts to hit the road. And that's where people really start to engage. And that's how we really start to get our teams working better together. That's where the magic happens in what we will do, is the coming together of people to implement something. But on the other side of a whole lot of work is the satisfaction of being able to say we did something. And there's every day, week, month, year that goes by, every organisation does things. And you can put your hand up and say, this is what we've achieved. Because ultimately we want to be organisations, we want to be a collective, we want to be part of a team that says this is what we are. We want to be able to say we're innovative, we want to be able to say that we're changing, we want to be able to say that we're doing, radical things for our customers, amazing things for our teams. But we want to be there, but there's a whole lot to do to get there. So before I jump into something of getting you to do some things and grabbing your pen and paper, just want to jump in the chat. I can see some great answers here already. But where would you put yourself? Where would you put your team? If you think about the team that you belong to, where do you think you are? Is it still feeling quite hard in that you can't, or you could do something? You're still trying to wrap your arms around what you could do? Yep, Tom, great to see. Thank you. Yeah, feels like Groundhog Day. Oh, yep, some great people already at it. We are, that's fantastic, Magdalena. Yeah, the Groundhog Day, I think if that movie came out today, I think that would be the one. We don't actually need that movie anymore. Every day I feel has felt like Ground Day, particularly in my neck of the woods as well. But the interesting thing with this, and we can't, we could, we will, we did, we are, is that many of us aren't just part of one team anymore. So back in 1965, when Bruce Tuckman talked about forming, storming, norming and performing, the word team actually meant, quite a cohesive unit that was generally co-located, generally with a manager or leader near or close by. But we all know since 1965 that the world's shifted a lot. And I actually started to count how many teams have I been part of the same time. So you might have a leader. We should all belong to a team where there is a very clear manager or leader, but most of us are also parts of projects where we might have a different leader, or you may be part of a leadership team. So you are part of your own team and you're part of the leadership team, and you may be part of the steering committee. So as we move through the rest of this webinar today, be just really cognizant of, and maybe sit and think about, what are all the different teams that you're a part of, and where are you all on this journey? Because I've been part of some great teams and some not great teams at the same time. And yeah, Sharon's saying we've just gone through a restructure in the area. Departmental wide structure was announced yesterday. So yeah, there's still a lot of uncertainty, a lot of change that's filtering through. But we all are motivated by progress. So one of my favorite books of all time is by a lady called Teresa Amabile. She's based in the States. She's done a lot of research into what motivates teams and what keeps them engaged. And her research found that the number one thing that motivates us is seeing meaningful progress every day. So when we're stuck in these lower levels that we can't and we could, the thing that we're actually craving is progress, because progress gives us certainty and it gets things starting to move. But I wanted you to dive into a little bit more. If you could grab your pen and paper, or if you are a digital first kind of person, grab an iPad. And I want you to pick one of the teams that I just mentioned. Now, it could be the team that you either lead, if you're a leader, if you're part of a team, pick that team. But pick a team where you spend the majority of your time with. And on your piece of paper, I'd like you to draw a circle in the middle. This is going to get a little bit Blue Petery for people that remember Blue Peter, showing my age. And I want you to draw a line up from the top, and I want you to draw a line down the bottom, and then really simply to each corner. So you end up with something that kind of looks like a flag. In the middle of the circle, I want you to write your team. Whatever your team is. So it could be a project team, HR team, IT team, with the team that you spend the majority of time. And what I've found working with lots of teams over the last couple of decades is that every team has certain types of people in it. We've all been taught things like DISC profiles and whether we're red, yellow, green, or blue, how we communicate with each other. But I actually think for where we are now, there's a whole lot of other things that we need in our team. So first thing I think we need in our teams are what I call seekers. These are the curious people that are out looking around at what's coming. They're finding they're really driven by what's our purpose, why we're here. They're looking for problems to solve. That's the first group of people that we're looking for. Second type of people I think we have in teams are dreamers. These are the people that love coming up with ideas that, if you could see off camera here, their walls full of Post-it notes, because I like dreaming up ideas too. But behind every dreamer, we need realists. These are the guys and girls that turn the great ideas into something that can actually work. And behind those people are what I call critics. So for everyone that's ever pulled together a plan only to have someone pull it apart, even though you're on the same team, you'll know who the critics are in your team. The other roles that we have in our teams are controllers. So I can confess that I have a controller tendency. I was a project manager for a long time. It's what I was paid to do. And I've slowly tried to wean myself off of controls and reporting and everything else. And then the last group we have in our teams are champions. So these are the people that are championing the ideas, are out in the business, getting support, getting buy-in, amongst other things. So when I look at different teams, I look at what's the makeup of the team and what's really driving how they're working together or not. What I'd like you to do on your piece of paper, just to make this really tangible, is on each of their arms, I'd like you to just draw five little bars. I just want you to sit and think about who's on your team, where most of your time goes, what you're working on at the moment, and just put a little cross on each part of this chart. So for example, if I was to look at my own team, we spend a lot of time reading, researching, going to events, looking at what's going on in industry. So I'd rate us quite high on seekers. Like we're out there looking and we work really, really well together, looking for where we're going. We're not so good at necessarily all the time, or at least consistently, coming up with ideas. So we get lots and lots of input, but we're turning them into tangible ideas. We need to do a little bit more with. But I'd actually say we're really good at turning the ideas that we do choose into real plans. I run a relatively small team and I had the joy of hiring them all. So we're all on the same page, so I don't actually have to deal with too much criticism. I certainly don't have to deal with the corporate politics that I used to see almost on a daily basis. But I know that I have got a whole team of champions. And a bit, if you've ever done a spider chart, if you to draw these together, you end up with a bit of a diagram that shows you where, when it comes to how to get more out of your team, areas where you could focus your team or start to focus your team to engage them in not just what a lot of us are working on, which is a lot of this left-hand side. So if you think about where we've been in the last year, we've been championing an awful lot of work. We've been controlling a lot. We've been trying to navigate a lot of change. And there's been a lot of reasons to be critical or uncertain, or to be to resist some of the change that's around at the moment, because that's what our natural response to uncertainty. Now, if you've drawn the dots, I'll give you a second just to catch up if you're on your piece of paper. The next thing I'd like you to do is, if where we are today on the 10th of February, where do those dots need to be? So for you to lead the team or to be part of the team, there is all of those things that we talked about before. If you wanted to be part of a team that says we are innovative and we are, kicking goals and we are exceeding our customers' expectations and we are doing all of these great things, where do the dots need to be? Because I know that what my team really wants is everything that's on the right. Even though we do a lot of work on the left and that's where we spend time, what is on the right-hand side of this? Having time to be curious and be creative, finding space to come up with new ideas, coming up with plans rather than being told what the plans are going to be. That's what keeps my team engaged, and it's what's kept every team I've led engaged. The more they feel like they are contributing on the right, the more engaged they will be on the left. So if I was to draw this for my team, I would say I'm pretty happy with where we are on seekers. I need to be more intentional as a leader about what I'm doing when it comes to ideas. It can't be that I get to the end of the financial year and then ask them what ideas they've got. We're pretty good on realists. I'm happy with where I am on critics. and in this side of my picture, the controller championing seekers works really well. I'll just give you guys a second to do that for you, for your own team. What's really important when you're looking at each of your team, when you're looking at your team in particular, and when I talk to a lot of executives, the executives tell me that they want the things that are on the right-hand side of the circle. So they're looking for opportunities. You know, there's been some absolutely amazing stories that have come out of the last year where organizations have grabbed opportunities that didn't exist before COVID. There's lots of ingenious stories that come out. So one of my favorites here in Melbourne is Stage Kings, who used to make sets for theatre that have shifted their whole business into making furniture. And I think they've done as well making furniture as they had doing set design. And, you know, they bought one of those Christmas trees. I've got one of those Christmas trees as well, Magdalena. You know, so there's some amazing stories that have come out of the last year that don't need to stop because things are starting to return to normal in the part of the world that I'm in, at least. Behind every conversation with innovation, though, I find most leaders then go, okay, well, what is actually practical? What's actually achievable? And what we really want is for our teams to be championing change and leading change for us. I'm just going to finish with one or two top tips that if you're looking at your team and where they may be on this chart, or where you may be, you need to focus some more. I'm just going to give you one tip for each one so that you've got a few hows to take away. And then if you've got questions or particular scenarios that you want to work through, or particular roadblocks that you come up against, that we can dive into those in Q&A. So my number one tip, if you are lacking seekers in your team or lacking time to find new ideas and new opportunities, is to find ways to open up your team to what is outside. Now, what is outside could be finding a webinar to watch as simple as finding a webinar every week to watch. It could be as simple as finding someone from across the industry to speak. It could be picking a book to read, or getting a subscription to whatever the industry journal is that is relevant for your industry. Doesn't have to be, we've got to go away for 5 days to do strategic planning, or we need to, you know, have an entire innovation strategy before we can come up with an idea. There's lots of ways that I think as leaders we can get our team engaged and working together on where the future is going to be and where we want to be. On the dreamer one, I'm a big fan of getting people to generate ideas. And I'm saying this as a project person that's delivered a lot of them. Most organizations, most teams will go for what I call the default answer. They'll see an opportunity as a seeker, and they'll go straight from how do we take that idea to practical, and they miss the opportunity in this dreamer phase to come up with great ideas. If you've ever gone straight to solution mode, I've been there many times, and I now see how many opportunities we miss to really engage and get people working together, either in our teams or across the organization. Some of the top tips I've got for you on that is, particularly now where your team's remote, find ways of getting them to connect with other people in your organization. One of the programs that I run that's been really popular recently is getting top talent from across organization on sessions like this to just get them to share what they're seeing in their business, because those informal conversations and idea generation isn't happening in the same way that it used to. On the practical front, my number one tip of getting your team more engaged is let them build the plan. Don't build it for them. I cannot say this as much. If you take nothing from this session, but there's one tip, is do not build a plan for your team. They will not engage, it's your plan. So take a leaf out of these guys' books that I mentioned before, give them an opportunity to say what the plan looks like, and then add your real value to it. Add your leadership insights to it, and get them engaged in that way. But also be willing to make space for criticism. Now, I'm sure we've all been on the teams where there's been someone, I'm going to call someone John. Sorry if your name is John, but John has a bee in his bonnet about something. And it doesn't matter what the rest of the team does, John is just going to sit there with his arms crossed, and he's going to say it's not going to work, and he's going to say that we tried this 5 years ago, and he's going to say, I'm not interested. This isn't what I'm here to do. It's not my job. We've all worked with a John. Again, sorry if your name's John. And it's really easy for when we've got a John in our team to push them to one side, or to say that, they need to be a team player, or they need to lift the game. When actually, chances are John actually has some knowledge. We just got to find a way of getting John to contribute in a way that isn't in the negative, but it's in the positive. So my number one tip, if you've got a critic in your team, or you're dealing with a critic, is to have an offline conversation with them, understand what their concerns are. Because I find that most people don't resist change, they actually resist uncertainty. And it's just our job as a leader that we've got to find out what that uncertainty is. And if it may be for John that doesn't feel like he's being listened to, and then all of a sudden he's back in the game, and he's contributed this amazing insight that actually makes your idea much more realistic. I'm a massive fan, no surprise, having been a project manager, that accountability is so important. Accountability does not equal telling people what to do or micromanaging. So accountability to me is giving people really, really clear goals. It's getting your team really, really clear on what their individual goals are, but what your collective mission is as a group, and then giving them accountability for getting on with it, and course correcting as we need to. That's the job as a leader, is course correction, not controlling. And then set a tempo. And my last tip before we get to questions is set a tempo that is right now sustainable. I've been burnt many, many, many times trying to deliver projects by dates that in hindsight weren't achievable. And there's nothing worse when you're trying to keep a team engaged, is giving them a task that they know they're going to fail in. So what do you want them to champion, and what is the velocity that is going to work? If you've got a team that is, I'm going to pick a really bad car. I'm going to show my lack of Australian car knowledge. I'll pick an English one. If you're driving a Lada, which is a Russian car, and you set a deadline that is only achievable in a Ferrari, the outcome is really, really clear from the get-go. So hopefully those tips, a couple of quick tips there, will go to questions. I'm sure some more will come out. But have a look at your team, have a look at the way that you're spending time as a team, and really start to make some key decisions on what you can do, even remotely, to get a better representation of what people are doing around this circle, and it will work wonders with how you work better together. So before I pass back to Richard, if you've enjoyed this, I've got a program that I work with leaders, teams and talent called Future Shapers. So if you are one of the organisations that is into innovation projects and change, and you're looking to the future and you're trying to find ways of bringing people together to move out of where we've been and where we're going. I'd love to have a conversation with you. And I also run a mega conference called VID. VID came out last year in response to COVID. It is a month-long online learning event. I've got 60 speakers this year, ranging from Don Price from Atlassian to Colin Ellis, who wrote Culture Hacks. I've got some people from the States. Got the Major League Baseball pitch coach from the Los Angeles Angels, and a whole raft of different speakers. So if you're looking for something to get your teams re-energized as they either come back to work or are navigating their way out, I'd love to see you at VID. I've got a special code that I'll get the Teamgage team to send out to everyone, but if you're keen to get a ticket, just head to vid21conference.com and just pop in mates rates, and you'll get a special prize for staying to the end of this webinar. But on that note, Richard, I'm going to hand back to you. And thanks so much for your time. And I could see you nodding as we were talking, Richard. So hopefully a lot of it resonated. We've got some great questions.
Absolutely. I was holding myself back at a few parts. I think, yeah, there's so many good points that you made there. And one of them just reminded me, there was a great interview with Jeff Schwartz last week. He works for Deloitte and other places. And he just talks about the data of the last couple of decades and how, teams who co-own solutions and co-design just deliver better results. Pure and simple. And I think you made that point really, really well. And that's something we're very cognizant about, through Teamgage. Which kind of brings us to a good question from Stephanie. So she's asking about, how do you create that shared accountability when there could be some individuals getting away with not doing as much? Any tips, Julia, around how you can support people when they're not maybe pulling their weight or taking that accountability?
Yes, I think if I go back to what you were just saying about co-creation, giving people the option, or giving people accountability for creation mentally when it comes to doing the work means they're more likely to do it, because it's a date that they, rather than it being a date that they've been told to deliver by someone else, it's something that they've put their hand up for and said, yeah, I'm going to do this bit. So I've personally found as a leader where I've struggled with people taking, for lack of a better word, the dead weight or the dead wood, is because they feel like they've been told what to do, or they don't think it's achievable, or they haven't had a say in it, so they're not bought in. And it's that last one, which I would really encourage you to focus on. The other thing that I find really helps, and you probably see this, Richard, with your clients as well, is rather than them being accountable to you as a leader, get them to be accountable to each other. Right? No one wants to be the worst player on a team. And they may learn the hard way the first time that they come to a team meeting or a status meeting or whatever. But it starts to become very clear when they're not pulling their weight, but it's not their accountability to you as a leader, it's the accountability to each other that I think is really important. Yeah,
that's great advice. I think, everyone wants to be part of a team at the end of the day and have good relationships with others. And I think also linking to shared goals is powerful wherever that's possible. That's great advice.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people, and this is one of the questions that came up, are thinking about all of the change fatigue at the moment, and still teams coming back this year that are kind of checked out. Any thoughts on that, Julia, and what we can try and do there?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things. A good friend of mine, Dr. Amy Silver, wrote an article on LinkedIn. I'll share it with you guys at Teamgage as well, around allowing people about being patient. So I think it's going to be really easy for us to fall into the trap of the way that we came into the last year is not going to be the way that we came out. Like, I remember the day where I suddenly realized that the world was going to change. It was the 13th of March last year. And I was suddenly at home, and it went from all of my work being face-to-face speaking to being at home. Whereas the path out of this is going to be more of an incline, not a straight cutoff, if that makes sense. So I think the first thing is to be aware that that incline is going to be there for some time. I think the second thing is everyone's going to have a slightly different response to what that incline is. I know for my own personal response to the last year is there's some days I've just gone, probably October, November, December last year, I was done. I was just like, just get me to Christmas, give me a drink and a bit of turkey, and that was all I needed at this point last year. Now I'm sort of going, okay, now I'm off and running. We've got 75. I think at one point I saw up to 100 people on a webinar, so I can start to feel the momentum coming, which is great. So I think that's the second thing to do. I think the last one would be we're going to have a really broad range of people. So we're going to have people that are back and itching to get going, and there'll be people at the opposite. And we've got to find ways of normalizing that. And it's not going to be about. I don't think it's actually going to be about performance, because I know high performers that are suddenly really struggling. They're not necessarily struggling because they've forgotten how to do their job. It's because they're struggling for everything you just talked about. So if there is a mental health wellbeing part of the conversation, I'd really encourage people to explore that with their organisations. There's lots and lots of support in organisations and outside right now to get people the right support if that's what they need. But I would be setting really, really achievable short goals. What can you do in the next 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks? That's it. Like still have the bigger mission, but we've got to get the flywheel spinning. And the only way to get the flywheel spinning is to start to get some of that work, those short-term goals going again. Sorry, that was a long-winded answer, but there was a lot in that one.
Well, there's so much to that, I think, and so many of us can relate to that. I think that point about at different points of the journey, some of us were probably ready for Christmas turkey in October last year, right? But yeah, and the well-being point as well. We've seen a lot of organisations really focus around well-being, and teams are such a powerful opportunity to have a check-in culture, to look for people in and around you that are at a different point, maybe needing support. And we've seen a lot of our clients really use technology to try and strengthen that culture around checking in with others, which I think is it's an important part of this, and the well-being science, like you say, is very important.
Yeah, and just because you had a good team that worked in March last year doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to work in the same way. I mean, a lot of us have made changes in the last year to get them working in a certain way. As we go back to a hybrid environment, and hopefully eventually back to 100% capacity, or most of our people working together again, as leaders, we're going to have to keep course correcting and figuring out how to get our teams working better together at each step of that journey.
Yeah, we move forward and back on that spectrum that you shared.
Yes, yeah.
It's about whole of government departmental changes that just suddenly came in at probably the worst time that could have happened last year. That can happen at any time. I think it's really important.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's great. Thoughts, a couple of questions around technology, Julia, and how teams can kind of embrace, maybe use technology to some of the points that you mentioned before. Do you have any kind of thoughts there or reflections on what organizations are doing right now?
Oh, we need a glass of wine for this one. I'm saying this, having implemented a lot of technology. I come from the school of thought that tech is a tool. It's not a magic wand. It's not a nirvana that suddenly we give people tools and then they're miraculously more engaged or more efficient or more productive, or whatever reason we have for giving them the tools. My school of thought is fewer tools, less is more. Like, I don't know about you, but I've got Zoom, Teams, Skype. What else have I got? Crowdcast. I've got so many virtual platforms on my computer at the moment because I'm working with different organizations doing different things. But less is more in terms of tech. I think giving your team very intentional time not to be online is so important. Like, what would it look like if you just told your team to go and read for an hour?
Yeah, that's right.
As opposed to be in Zoom for an hour or go for a walk for an hour, I think we can shape our teams in the same way that we used to have, afternoon teams and afternoon teas and trips to the pub and all of those social things. We can still do those things now. I think, and then the last one is be really clear what you want to use the tech for. So I've spoken to a lot of people that have found it quite overwhelming because they don't know what to do with the tech. They know they've got a lot of it and there's lots of different ways that it could be used, but it's not necessarily, they're not really clear on how to use it and for what either.
Yeah, as well. Yeah, the purpose behind it, it's so important, especially at times like this where we're time poor and we're stressed and fatigued. We talk about that, a lot with, I think Mars is in the call today. We've had some conversations around that about, the technology's got to support how you work in teams, and as teams have been having to adapt and change what you do for technology. That's really fundamental.
And be really, really specific. So I haven't had a physical team for a few years now. So I actually came into COVID where one of my team worked remotely elsewhere in Victoria and another one of my team works in the Philippines. And so it didn't actually change how we work at all, but there's really specific things. Like, we know that if we just need to update each other, we just use chat. We don't use email. They know that they only email me if there's something that they need me to sign off or decide, and we only meet when we need to physically get together. And that actually frees me up to do quite a lot because I'm not on Zoom with them all the time. So be really, really specific would be my, make it really clear.
I think those channels, there's so many channels and so much noise, isn't there? What do you use channels for what? And, we talk about this in our team as well. How quickly should we expect a response? Just because someone sends you a Slack message or something, or a Teams message, doesn't mean they expect a response straight away. Those things are really important. A great question here, Julia, about, and I know our clients raise this a lot, how do you help teams work with other teams across the organization? So a lot of organizations, what they're trying to do now in the transformation depends on teams collaborating amongst teams. Any insights you can share around that?
Yeah, so for particularly running projects for so long, most of my teams came from across the business. And what I find is really, really interesting is they come to work on the project, but they've also got this other reporting line working. And there's can be a force in or a tension in that difference when you bring people together. So if Richard had a team and I had a team, if we got people from those two teams together, what are they doing? Are they doing what Richard wants them to do or what I want them to do? Or is it something that, Richard and I need to agree on a bigger mission, something that unites, something that both teams can buy into? I think that would be the first thing. I think the other thing I've seen that's worked quite well, and certainly the feedback that I got on my Future Shapers program, where I've been bringing people from across organizations together, is that people actually aren't that proactive when it comes to connecting with people. Like, if you think about life pre-COVID, we had lots of accidental conversations. Like, we'd bump into Sarah at the coffee machine or the water machine. But if you'd actually said, I need to go and see Sarah, or I haven't seen Sarah for a while, people won't necessarily stand up and proactively go looking remotely in the same way as they do now. So I would encourage people to be really intentional about what they set up. A client of mine's recently set up a top talent forum. So rather than everyone being in a top talent group, but no one knows who else is top talent, they've said, right, we're just going to get this group together so they can start to talk and share stories about what they're doing across the organisation. Whereas when you're at the leadership level, you have those forums. They exist in leadership meetings. They don't exist for our teams. So it'd be, they don't have to be meetings, make them more fun than just a Zoom, but set challenges, give problems out to people, lots of different things we can do to get people talking.
That's so important. Just so important, from a perspective on many areas. Probably got time for a couple more quick questions. What are your thoughts, Julia? There's an interesting point here around team dynamics. People are talking quite a bit about this in terms of how often they should be meeting and checking in. I know some teams do that daily, some do it weekly, some do it, they don't have a rhythm, a regular rhythm. What are your thoughts around that and your experience?
I'm probably more interested in how many people are checking in together than how often they are. So I would go, if you go on the principle that an effective team is normally 6 to 8 people, if you're on a 20 people Zoom conversation for an hour every day, that's not effective use of 20 people's time. So I'm not a big fan of setting meetings for meeting's sake. I do think we need to have we do need to have something regular where we're checking in, but I would go, my personal style is we come together when we need to, but to do that, we need to be really clear on what outside the meeting looks like. So we've replaced the need for meetings with chat and document sharing and collaboration and all of those sorts of things. I get that working, and then you remove the need for the meetings. But I would I've heard a lot of people being invited to lots and lots of meetings, and when you ask them, do you actually need to go to that meeting, the answer is often no. So who are the 6 to 8 people that really need to be in the meeting?
Yeah. And lots of technology now, right? So shorter meetings are probably better from a concentration span focus point of view as well. Yep. That's a consideration as well. I know we've seen a lot more teams that are having 30-minute, 15-minute meetings rather than 45, 60-minute meetings, which was...
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I've seen all sorts of great ideas come out of the last 12 months. So I've seen one client that types key decisions in the chat, saves the chat to Teams, so that if anyone that wasn't in the meeting wanted to see what was talked about, the notes are there. I've had another group of people, or not a client of mine, but just a story that I heard, where they send their most important meetings off to Rev to have them audio transcribed, so that we don't have to do, like, if you miss the meeting, you can sit and literally read back or watch the recording. Again, not going to work for every organisation, but we don't all need to be in the same room for everything, I don't think.
Maybe got time for one more. This is an interesting one. We talked about the balance and strengths and those that are the visionaries in the team, but I suppose we would love to see more people in more of our teams really thinking about solutions and ideas. Yep. Any general tip or suggestion around how we can just generate more ideas within our teams that we can explore, whether it be from the realists or the... do you think there's a particular kind of style of meeting or forum, or have you seen things work with that?
Yeah, so I've got two answers that are probably going to sound contradictory, but I promise you they're not. The first is, do you want more ideas or do you want more problems to solve? That would be the first question, because I see a lot of organizations generating a lot of ideas that go nowhere, and they don't go anywhere because they don't solve a problem that's big enough, or important enough, or doesn't. I'm not sort of saying come up with ideas to solve world peace, but if the idea, generating ideas for ideas' sake, is a waste of time. If the problem is really clear, then the ideas then generate the ideas off the problem. That would be the first bit. In terms of physically generating the ideas, I think the best way I've seen is to, I'm a big fan of design thinking. So there's early stages of design thinking, which is actually get people to go and have the conversation with the person that's got the problem. So that whole empathy piece is I find really, really useful, because they will explain the problem and what they need in a far better way than I ever will. So if you haven't looked into design thinking, I would really encourage people to go and take a look at that. And then in terms of actual generation, I find letting people generate their ideas and then come together and then workshopping them is great. I find some of the ideation sessions I've been part of over the years is you'll get to a room when we were able to, and we'd all write on post-it notes and we'd put them up. And as soon as you put them up, it would be immediately obvious that one of those ideas was the one that was most likely going to be the idea. Sometimes it's because the boss wrote it or the most influential person in the team wrote it, but there'll be one idea that as soon as it's on the board is the solution. And you will miss the opportunity to get input from everyone else on the team.
Sure everyone's seen that, right? Yeah, everyone can relate to that. It's in someone else's words and hard for it to get on.
I think they're good, and just make sure everyone in the room's an equal, and that it's not the boss's idea or the champion's choice or whatever phrase you want to put in it.
Because that's exciting. When that can be, something that we can all own and work toward and strive. That's really, really powerful. That's really powerful. We've seen that, and clients have seen that. Probably time for one more. Mars has put a great question in. Tips for encouraging rapport building when you've got new people joining the team remotely. And you've not met them in person. Any ideas how we can do that?
This is actually quite a topical one, because my husband was onboarded on Monday remotely. So we've been talking about this the last few days.
We've had it in our team as well.
I think if you think about what we would normally do when it comes to onboarding, where the new person would arrive and they'd be given a security card and they'd be introduced to everyone that's new. I think we could actually flip that conversation on its head and say, rather than you being new, you're someone new that we can learn from. And get, what can you, especially because a lot of our teams have been quite closed and remote for a year, start conversations like, where have you come from? What did you see? What worked where you've come from? What gold can you bring with you that we can learn from, rather than being, oh, you're new, we need to get to know you. We're going to kind of keep you at arm's length until we know that you're not going to break anything, and then we'll get, that feels quite, let's not do that.
We can turn it into opportunity, right? A new perspective. Lens
new perspective. Yeah, absolutely. Turn it on its head.
No, that is fantastic. There's been quite a few comments, some great questions in there. Thank you everyone for those questions and the comments. There's so much here. I think we can unpack more of it potentially in a follow-up session. But running short a little bit on time, Julia, any kind of final words, things that you kind of want to put out there, or just a reminder about the follow-ups? I know we are going to send some content out. We'll send recordings, won't we?
I'll just put my contact details up here in case people miss the email. So if you've loved this, I do write regularly on LinkedIn, and I have a newsletter called Nurse of Steel. You can subscribe to that on my website. And there's my email and web address too, and always happy to chat about anything to do with teams and where we're going in terms of shaping the future. So thank you for some really great questions. There's a few of those that I'm going to go away and think about as well. So thank you so much.
I'll just round out. I will just talk a little bit about what we're doing over the next few weeks. So I know many of you know a bit about Teamgage. So we're all about engaging teams completely on a topic of what we're talking about today, but through the lens of technology. So we're actually running a couple of live demos over the next couple of weeks. Really, really great, engaging type of way to have this conversation, look at how technology can support teams, all about the stuff that we've just been talking about, week in, week out with those challenges, focusing on where they can improve and do things better. So there'll be a bit of detail to follow this. If you can join either of those sessions, I'd really encourage it. There's some really great stuff and conversations we can have as part of that. We will, at the end of this, send out contact details so you can get in touch with Julia or myself or anyone within the teams here, and we'll have a recording and a bit extra detail as well. So thank you everyone for stopping by. It's been such a timely conversation. I think we can all agree that everything this year is going to be really built on the success and the strength of us as teams in our organizations. So hopefully you can put some of those tips and advice into practice straight away. Yep, Julia, I've already got my spider graph. Work on and have a think about afterwards as well. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
In the near future, hopefully.
Of course. Thanks. See you. Bye.
Bye.